The lecture hall stretched wide and tall, built to accommodate beings of every size and shape. Rows of seats curved upward in a half circle, filled with students whose appearances ranged from vaguely familiar to completely alien. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few seemed to be made of something that shimmered like living crystal. The air smelled strange, a mixture of different atmospheric preferences blended by the environmental systems. Jake Morrison sat near the back, his simple human frame looking almost plain compared to the exotic creatures around him. He had been at the Galactic Academy for 3 months now, the only human among thousands of alien students. Earth had only joined the galactic community 2 years ago, and humanity was still considered primitive by most standards. The other species had been traveling the stars for centuries, some for millennia. Humans were the new kids, barely worth noticing. Professor Kelvonis stood at the front of the hall, his towering insectoid body moving with precise mechanical grace. His species, the Zetherians, were respected scholars across the galaxy. Multiple eyes dotted his triangular head, allowing him to see in nearly every direction at once. When he spoke, his mandibles clicked and his translator device rendered the sounds into dozens of languages simultaneously. Today's lecture was about evolutionary advantages and natural weapons. Professor Kelvonis moved between holographic displays showing different species and their unique biological gifts. He seemed excited about the topic, his antenna twitching with enthusiasm. Every sentient species that reaches the stars carries with them the weapons that allowed them to survive on their home world, Kelvonis explained. His translator gave his words a slightly mechanical tone. These natural advantages shaped not only their biology but their culture and their approach to conflict. He gestured to a student in the front row, a creature covered in sharp, glistening spines. Cadet Threx, please demonstrate. The spined alien stood and turned slowly. Each spine on his back could extend outward with a soft clicking sound. My people, the Kralix, possess poisonous spines, Threx said, his voice deep and rumbling. A single spine contains enough venom to paralyze a creature 3 times my size. We evolved as prey animals, but our defense mechanism was so effective that we eventually became apex predators on our world. Kelvonis nodded approvingly. Excellent. The Kralix transformed from hunted to hunter, through evolutionary pressure. Who else would like to share? A student whose body crackled with barely contained electricity raised a limb. The Volthari demonstrated how her species could generate bioelectric shocks powerful enough to stun large predators. Another student, built like a living tank with thick armored plating, showed how his exoskeleton could withstand extreme temperatures and even resist plasma weapons. Jake watched with interest, taking notes on his digital pad. Every species seemed to have something impressive, something that made them formidable. Claws that could cut through steel, acid that could dissolve rock, natural camouflage that made them nearly invisible, enhanced strength that let them lift weights many times their own mass. The galaxy was full of dangerous creatures who had clawed their way to the top of their food chains. Professor Kelvonis continued calling on students, building up his lecture with example after example. The class was engaged, and even the usually bored students were paying attention. Then the professor's many eyes swiveled toward the back of the hall, landing on Jake. The human felt the weight of dozens of alien gazes turning his way. A few students made sounds that the translator interpreted as laughter or amusement. Jake heard whispers in the universal trade language, words like soft skin and blunt tooth. And what of humans? Kelvonis asked, his mandibles spreading in what might have been a smile or a sneer. Cadet Morrison, perhaps you would enlighten us about your species' natural weapons. Jake stood slowly, aware that every eye in the room was on him. He had known this moment would come eventually. Humans were curiosities here, specimens to be studied. Most aliens couldn't understand how humans had survived at all, much less achieved space travel. He walked down the stairs between the rows of seats, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet hall. When he reached the front, he turned to face the class. Hundreds of alien faces stared back at him, some curious, some amused, some openly dismissive. Well, Kelvonis prompted. Your species has no claws, no venom, no armor plating. Your strength is average at best. Your senses are remarkably limited compared to most species. You cannot fly. You cannot breathe underwater without assistance. You cannot survive in extreme temperatures. So please tell us, what exactly is humanity's natural weapon? The question hung in the air. Jake could feel the expectation, the assumption that he would fumble for an answer or make some weak excuse. Some students were already losing interest, convinced that humans were just another weak species that had gotten lucky. Jake raised one hand and tapped his temple with a single finger. The gesture was slow, deliberate. "Spite, Professor," he said clearly. Pure, unadulterated spite. The room erupted in confused chittering, clicking, and various forms of alien laughter. Several students exchanged looks that clearly communicated their opinion of this answer. Even Professor Kelvonis seemed taken aback, his antenna drooping slightly. "Spite?" Kelvonis repeated, his tone skeptical. "You claim that petty vindictiveness is your species' evolutionary advantage?" Jake shook his head. "Not petty, Professor. When you back a human into a corner, when you tell us something is impossible, when you try to break us down, that's when we become truly dangerous. We don't surrender when we should. We don't accept defeat when it's logical. We keep pushing forward out of pure stubborn refusal to give up." He turned to address the entire class. "My species has a long history of doing impossible things just because someone said we couldn't. We've fought wars we had no business surviving. We've explored places that should have killed us. We've overcome disasters that should have ended our civilization. And you want to know the secret? We're too spiteful to quit." Jake's voice grew stronger. "When you knock a human down, we get back up. When you hurt us, we remember. When you think you've won, that's when we're just getting started. We'll burn our own ships if it means taking you down with us. We'll fight battles we can't win just to make sure you don't win either. We're the only species that looks at a predator 10 times our size and thinks, maybe I can kill that thing and eat it." The laughter had stopped now. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned forward, reassessing the small, soft-skinned creature standing before them. "Humans don't have claws, but we made knives. We don't have venom, but we made poisons. We don't have armor, but we made shields and later powered suits. We don't have natural weapons, Professor, because we made ourselves into a weapon. And the fuel that drives us, the thing that makes us keep going when any rational species would surrender, is spite." Professor Kelvonis regarded Jake with several of his eyes while others scanned the room, measuring the reaction of the class. "That is a fascinating theory, Cadet Morrison, but spite is not a quantifiable evolutionary advantage. It does not appear on anatomical scans. It cannot be measured in a laboratory." "No," Jake agreed, "but you can measure its effects. Every time a human was told something was impossible and then did it anyway. Every time we faced extinction and survived through sheer stubbornness. Every time we turned a disadvantage into an advantage because we refused to accept our limitations." The professor clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "You make an interesting argument, though I remain unconvinced that such psychological factors constitute a true natural weapon. But I appreciate your passion on the subject. You may return to your seat." As Jake walked back up the stairs, he could feel the eyes following him. The whispers had changed in tone. They weren't mocking anymore, just uncertain. He had planted a seed of doubt, made them question their assumptions. Professor Kelvonis continued his lecture, moving on to other topics, but Jake noticed the professor kept glancing his way throughout the rest of the class. When the lecture ended and students filed out, a few aliens gave Jake a wider berth than before. Jake gathered his things and headed toward the exit. He had no idea that in just a few months the entire galaxy would learn exactly what human spite looked like in action. They would see that sometimes the most dangerous weapon wasn't teeth or claws or venom. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon was the simple refusal to give up. The news spread across the galactic networks like wildfire. The Zitherian Collective and the Varkesh Dominion were on the brink of war over a star system called Kepler-7. The system itself was unremarkable except for one thing. Its asteroid belt contained vast deposits of quantum reactive minerals, essential for building faster-than-light drives. Both powers claimed historical rights to the system. The Zitherians said their ancestors had surveyed it first. The Varkesh claimed their colony ships had passed through it centuries ago. Diplomats met, argued, and got nowhere. Neither side would back down. Then the Varkesh made their move. 3 months after Jake's lecture at the Academy, the Varkesh Dominion's fleet jumped into Kepler-7 and seized control. They didn't just claim the asteroids. They destroyed a small Zitherian mining colony, killing 3,000 civilians in the process. The message was clear. The Varkesh were taking what they wanted, and anyone who stood in their way would be eliminated. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The massive chamber was built to hold representatives from every member species, a soaring dome of light and sound. Translator devices hummed constantly, turning countless languages into something each delegate could understand. The air was thick with tension. Jake stood in the observation gallery, no longer just a student but now an aide to Ambassador Linda Hayes, Earth's representative to the Council. He watched as one after another, the major powers expressed sympathy for the Zetherians but refused to take action. The Methodian Union's representative, a being made of crystalline structures that chimed when it moved, spoke in musical tones. "We deplore this violence, but the Varkesh Dominion is a formidable military power. A direct confrontation would cost countless lives across multiple species. We cannot risk war for one system." The crystalline Concordat agreed. Their representative, a floating cluster of sentient gases contained in a force field, spoke next. "The loss of life is tragic, but escalation serves no one. We must pursue diplomatic solutions." The Asheran Federation, whose people resembled armored bears, expressed similar sentiments. They condemned the Varkesh actions, but stopped short of promising military support. The Varkesh ambassador sat calmly through all of this, a massive reptilian creature named War Leader Grask. His species had evolved as apex predators, and their society was built around concepts of strength and dominance. Grask's scales were scarred from countless battles and his teeth were filed to sharp points. When he spoke, his voice was a deep rumble that needed no translator to sound menacing. "The Varkesh Dominion has claimed what is rightfully ours," Grask declared. "We took action because the Zetherians refused to see reason. If others wish to challenge us, they are welcome to try. We will crush any who oppose us." It was a blatant threat and everyone in the chamber knew it. The Varkesh had one of the largest and most advanced military fleets in known space. Their warships were built for one purpose: destruction. Nobody wanted to face them in open combat. Commander Zekthis, representing the Zetherian collective, stood with as much dignity as he could muster. His insectoid body trembled slightly, whether from rage or grief, Jake couldn't tell. 3,000 of my people are dead. Their only crime was mining resources in a system we have occupied peacefully for decades. If the Council will not act, then the Zetherian collective stands alone. We will not surrender our rights out of fear. The words were brave, but everyone knew the reality. The Zetherians had a decent military, but they were no match for the Varkesh. If they fought alone, they would lose. It would be a slow, grinding defeat, but it was inevitable. Jake leaned over to whisper to Ambassador Hayes. "Are we really going to let this happen? The Varkesh just murdered 3,000 civilians and the whole galaxy is too scared to do anything?" Linda's expression was grim. She was a career diplomat, experienced and cautious. But she was also human, and Jake could see the anger burning behind her careful composure. "Watch," she said quietly. As the debate continued in circles, Linda stood. The gesture activated her delegation's speaking rights, and a soft tone drew attention to the human section of the chamber. Many delegates barely glanced over. Humanity was so new to galactic politics that most species still didn't take them seriously. "The Terran Alliance wishes to speak," Linda announced. War Leader Grask turned one massive eye toward her, his expression somewhere between amusement and contempt. "The humans? I am surprised you even have an opinion on matters beyond your single world." Linda ignored the insult. "The Terran Alliance may be new to this council, but we understand right and wrong. What the Varkesh Dominion did was not a territorial claim. It was murder. If we allow this aggression to go unchallenged, we send a message to every powerful species that might makes right. Today it's the Zetherians. Tomorrow it could be any of us. And what exactly do you propose to do about it?" Grask asked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Will you file a complaint? Write a strongly worded letter. Humanity has no power here. We have something better than power," Linda replied calmly. "We have principles. And we have the courage to act on them. The Terran Alliance officially declares its support for the Zetherian collective. We will commit our military forces to assist in the defense of their territory." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs and exclamations. Several delegates made sounds of disbelief. The Methodian representative actually chimed out loud in surprise. Even Commander Zekthis looked stunned. Grask began to laugh, a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the dome. "Your military forces? Earth has what, a dozen ships? Maybe 24? We have over 200 warships in the Kepler 7 system alone. You would send your pathetic fleet against us? This is suicide. Linda met his gaze without flinching. Perhaps, but at least we'll die doing what's right. That's more than most species here can say. The comment struck home. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The Methodian representative's crystals dimmed slightly in what might have been shame. You think your species is special? Grass continued, leaning forward on his massive claws. You have no natural weapons, no significant advantages. Your people are soft, weak. What makes you think you can stand against the Varkesh? Jake felt a surge of anger but kept his mouth shut. This wasn't his place to speak. But Linda smiled slightly and Jake recognized the expression. It was the same look he had worn when he stood before Professor Kelvanis's class. War Leader Grask, let me tell you something about humans, Linda said. We don't win because we're the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced. We win because we're too stubborn to quit. When you back us into a corner, when you tell us we can't win, when you assume we'll fold, that's when we become truly dangerous. I suggest you don't underestimate what humans are willing to do when we decide something is wrong. Grask snorted. We shall see. When your ships are burning debris, perhaps the galaxy will learn that brave words mean nothing without the strength to back them up. Perhaps, Linda agreed. Or perhaps you'll learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to surrender. The session ended without any other species committing forces. Earth stood alone with the Zetherians. As delegates filed out, Jake heard whispers in dozens of languages. Most were convinced the humans had just signed their own death warrant. Some thought it was noble but foolish. A few seemed impressed by the boldness even if they thought it was suicidal. Commander Zekthis approached Linda and Jake as they left the chamber. Ambassador Hayes, I do not know whether to thank you or apologize to you. Your offer is incredibly generous, but I fear it will only result in human casualties alongside my own people. Commander, my species has a saying, Linda replied. Evil triumphs when good people do nothing. We're not going to do nothing, but your fleet is so small compared to the Varkesh Armada. Linda smiled. Size isn't everything, Commander. Sometimes the smallest force can make the biggest impact if they're creative enough. Besides, we have something the Varkesh don't. What is that? Spite, Jake interjected, earning a glance from Linda but also a small nod of agreement. Zekthis looked confused. I do not understand this concept. You will, Linda promised. When humans fight, we don't fight to win gracefully. We fight to make sure that even if we lose, the enemy regrets ever starting the fight in the first place. We'll teach the Varkesh that attacking peaceful colonies comes with a price. As they walked through the corridors back to the Earth delegation offices, Jake felt a mixture of pride and fear. His species was about to face impossible odds. By every logical calculation, they would lose. The Varkesh had better ships, better weapons, better everything. But logic didn't account for human nature. It didn't account for the fact that humans had a long history of looking at impossible situations and saying, watch this. Throughout Earth's history, his people had faced extinctions, disasters, wars, and challenges that should have ended them. And every time they had survived through sheer stubborn determination. Now that determination would be tested on a galactic stage. The Varkesh expected an easy victory. They expected the small human fleet to make a token gesture and then retreat when things got difficult. They had no idea what was coming. Because the thing about backing humans into a corner was that it didn't make them surrender. It made. The TSS Defiance hung in space like a metal island in an ocean of stars. She was a carrier, one of Earth's newest designs, but compared to the massive warships of older galactic civilizations, she looked almost primitive. Her hull was angular and practical, built for function rather than intimidation. But she carried 48 fighters and a crew of 240 humans who knew exactly what they were heading into. Captain Ryan Blake stood on the bridge, studying the tactical display with the kind of focus that came from years of military service. At 42, his brown hair was starting to gray at the temples, and the lines around his eyes spoke of too many difficult decisions. He had served in Earth's Navy since he was 18, fought in the Mars Independence War, commanded ships through pirate raids in the outer colonies, and now he was about to face the most impossible odds of his career. Captain, we're receiving the final intelligence reports from Zetherian Command, said Lieutenant Sophie Grant from the tactical station. She was young, barely 26, but she had a sharp mind for strategy. Her fingers moved across holographic controls, pulling up data streams. Sir, the numbers are worse than we thought. The Varkesh have 214 warships in the Kepler 7 system. We have 5 ships total. 3 light cruisers, 2 destroyers, and the Defiance. Ryan nodded slowly. He had known the odds would be bad. Knowing the exact numbers somehow made it more real. What's the breakdown of their fleet? 23 battle cruisers, 67 heavy cruisers, 92 destroyers, and 32 support vessels. Their flagship is the Wrath of Conquest, a dreadnought-class ship with enough firepower to level a small moon. Sophie paused, looking at her captain. Sir, they outmass us by a factor of 40 to 1. Their shields are more advanced. Their weapons have longer range. Their armor is thicker. By every tactical metric, this is unwinnable. Around the bridge, other crew members worked at their stations, but Ryan could feel them listening. Everyone knew the situation. When Earth had committed to this fight, there had been no shortage of volunteers. Not one member of his crew had requested a transfer, even though they all knew this might be a one-way trip. Sophie, let me tell you something about humans, Ryan said, turning to face his tactical officer. We have a long history of fighting unwinnable wars. Do you know what happened at Thermopylae? She shook her head. 300 Spartans held off an army of thousands. They knew they would die. They fought anyway because some things are worth dying for. Or the Alamo, where less than 200 defenders faced an army of thousands. They lost, but they bought time and inspired others. Or the Battle of Britain, where a handful of pilots held off an entire air force that should have crushed them. Ryan smiled slightly. Sometimes we win those unwinnable wars. Sometimes we lose. But we always make the enemy remember us. The comm system crackled to life. Commander Zekthus's face appeared on the view screen, his insectoid features difficult to read but his body language suggesting stress. Captain Blake, our fleet is assembled. 18 vessels, mostly converted merchant ships with weapons bolted on. We have perhaps 4 ships that could be called proper warships. I appreciate your presence, but I must be honest. I do not see how we can prevail against the Varkesh. Ryan looked at the Zetherian commander. Commander, we're not here to win a conventional battle. We're here to show the Varkesh and everyone else watching that some principles are worth fighting for. We're here to be so annoying, so persistent, and so damn difficult to put down that we make them regret ever starting this fight. Zekthus's antennae twitched in confusion. I do not understand your strategy. You will. Just trust me and keep your ships ready to exploit any opportunities we create. The Varkesh expect a standard engagement. They expect us to line up our ships, exchange fire, and eventually break when casualties get too high. We're not going to do that. What are you going to do? Ryan's smile didn't reach his eyes. We're going to fight like humans, which means we're going to cheat, lie, use every dirty trick we can think of, and make this the most frustrating battle the Varkesh have ever experienced. He cut the channel and turned to his crew. All stations, battle readiness. Sophie, is pattern Delta 7 loaded into the navigation computers? Yes, sir. All ship captains have the tactical package. Captain Stevens on the Resolute says, and I quote, "About time we showed these aliens how Earth does things." Ryan chuckled. Gary Stevens was an old friend, a former fighter jock who had transitioned to commanding one of their destroyers. The man loved a good fight, especially one that let him be creative. Tell Stevens to stay focused. We're going to need perfect timing. Over the next hour, the small Allied fleet moved into position. The Varkesh fleet waited in a standard defensive formation around the Kepler-7 system, confident and relaxed. They had no reason to believe this would be anything but a quick, decisive victory. Their ships were superior in every way. The math was simple, but the Varkesh had made one critical error. They had assumed humans would fight like every other species they had faced. They expected logic, conventional tactics, adherence to the standard rules of engagement. They didn't understand that humans wrote their own rules. Ryan watched his tactical display. The Varkesh were already moving into an attack formation, their heavy battle cruisers forming the vanguard, shields powering up to maximum. It was a solid formation, one that had won them countless battles. Put the heavy ships in front. Let them absorb damage while the lighter ships flanked and surrounded the enemy. Standard doctrine taught in every military academy across the galaxy. Sir, they're advancing, Sophie reported. Multiple targeting locks detected. They're expecting us to meet them head-on. Of course they are. How many fighters do we have ready to launch? All 48 fighters are prepped and ready. Pilots are in their cockpits awaiting your order. Ryan took a deep breath. This was it. The moment where they either validated humanity's decision to stand up, or they died trying. Either way, the galaxy would remember this. Launch all fighters. Execute pattern Delta 7. All ships full burn on my mark. He paused, looking around at his bridge crew. They were ready. Faces determined, hands steady on their controls. Remember, people, we're not trying to destroy their entire fleet. We're trying to make them wish they had never heard of humans. We're trying to be such a massive pain in their collective ass that they make mistakes. And when they make mistakes, we exploit them. Understood? A chorus of acknowledgments came back. Mark. The Defiance shuddered as all 48 fighters launched simultaneously from her flight bays. The small craft streaked away from the carrier like a swarm of angry hornets. At the same time, the 5 human ships suddenly broke formation, scattering in different directions at maximum acceleration. On the Varkesh flagship, War Leader Grask watched the human ships scatter with satisfaction. They flee already? I expected at least token resistance. All ships pursue and destroy. But his tactical officer, a younger Varkesh named Kresh, was studying the sensor readings with concern. War Leader, their trajectory vectors do not indicate retreat. They are maneuvering into attack positions, but unlike any pattern I have seen before, they are disorganized and panicking. Continue the attack. The Varkesh fleet began to adjust, trying to target the fast-moving human vessels. But the human ships were smaller and more maneuverable than the heavy Varkesh cruisers. They jinked and weaved, never staying on a predictable course for more than a few seconds. Then the human fighters reached the Varkesh lines. Lieutenant Marcus Webb led Razor Flight, 12 fighters under his command. He had been a pilot for 8 years, and he was very, very good at his job. Razor Flight, remember the briefing. We're not here to score kills. We're here to cause chaos. Target their sensors, communications, point defense systems. Make them blind and deaf. The fighters dove toward the nearest Varkesh battlecruiser like sharks attacking a whale. The big ship's point defense systems opened up, filling space with weapons fire. 2 human fighters took hits immediately, spinning away damaged but not destroyed. The rest pressed in close, too close for the main guns to track. Marcus aimed for a cluster of sensor arrays along the battlecruiser's hull and opened fire. His weapons tore into the delicate equipment, shredding it. Around him, other fighters were doing the same, strafing along the hull, targeting anything that looked important. The Varkesh captain of that battlecruiser roared in frustration. His tactical displays were flickering, showing gaps in sensor coverage. Communication with other ships was becoming intermittent. These tiny craft were like insects, too small to kill easily but causing disproportionate damage. All point defense, focus on these fighters, he commanded. But the fighters were already breaking away, leaving the battlecruiser damaged and partially blind. And that's when Ryan sprang his real trap. Zekthus, that battlecruiser just ahead of your position. Its port shields are flickering from power redistribution. If you concentrate fire on that facing, you can punch through. The Zetherian commander didn't hesitate. His ships adjusted their aim and fired in unison. The concentrated barrage hit the weakened shield section and broke through, tearing into the battlecruiser's hull. The damage wasn't fatal, but it was significant. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and the Varkesh were starting to realize this would not be the easy victory they had expected. Their superior fleet should have crushed the Allied forces in the first hour. Instead, they were fighting a frustrating battle against an enemy that refused to stand still and trade blows. War Leader Grask paced on his flagship's bridge, his claws scraping against the metal deck plating. His tactical display showed chaos. The human ships were everywhere and nowhere, appearing out of sensor shadows, launching attacks, and disappearing before his ships could respond effectively. The Zetherian vessels had adopted similar tactics, following the humans' lead. Status report, Grask demanded. 3 battlecruisers heavily damaged, 5 cruisers with moderate damage, 9 destroyers reporting various system failures. His tactical officer reported. Enemy losses, 2 Zetherian ships destroyed, 1 human destroyer heavily damaged. Their fighter wing has lost 14 craft out of the original 48. The numbers should have favored the Varkesh overwhelmingly. They still had over 200 ships operational. But something was wrong. His fleet was taking constant nagging damage while the enemy remained frustratingly difficult to pin down. On the Defiance, Ryan watched his tactical display with satisfaction mixed with worry. They were doing better than anyone had expected, but they couldn't keep this up forever. His ship had taken several hits and the shields were down to 60%. More importantly, his fighters were exhausted from constant combat sorties. Captain, We have 17 fighters still combat ready, Sophie reported. The rest are either destroyed or too damaged to continue. Our missile reserves are at 40%. The Resolute reports main engine damage. They're down to 60% thrust. Ryan nodded. They had hurt the Varkesh, made them cautious, but the enemy still had overwhelming numbers. He needed something that would shake the Varkesh confidence. Get me Captain Stevens. The comm channel opened and Gary Stevens's face appeared. His ship was damaged, smoke visible in the background, but his expression was determined. Ryan, please tell me you have a crazy plan. I'm getting tired of running circles around these overgrown lizards. How attached are you to the Resolute? Stevens paused, understanding dawning in his eyes. That depends. Are we talking about a suicide run? More like an aggressive redeployment of assets. Well, she's a good ship, but if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I'm in. When do we go? Ryan studied the tactical display, looking for the right moment. The Varkesh formation had tightened after the initial chaos. They were learning, adapting. But that also meant their heavy ships were bunched together, protecting each other. One well-placed strike could cause significant damage. Sophie, do we have targeting data on their flagship? Yes, sir. The Wrath of Conquest is in the center of their formation. 12 battle cruisers surrounding it in a defensive sphere. Its shields are at full strength, and it hasn't engaged yet. War Leader Grask is probably directing the battle from there. Ryan smiled, but there was no humor in it. Then let's go knock on his door. All ships, prepare for Pattern Omega. Sophie, I need every bit of power we can spare redirected to engines. Strip it from life support if you have to. We're going to need one more burst of speed. Sophie's hands moved across her controls. Sir, Pattern Omega is a ramming attack. Are you sure? The Resolute is already too damaged to escape. Stevens knows it. Better to use her while we can. Ryan's voice was calm, but everyone on the bridge knew what he was ordering. Stevens, you'll lead. The rest of us will create an opening for you. Understood. It's been an honor, Captain. Stevens' voice was steady. The honor is mine, Gary. Make it count. The remaining human ships suddenly changed tactics. Instead of hit-and-run attacks, they accelerated directly toward the Varkesh formation. The 3 light cruisers and the Defiance formed up, combining their fire on a single point in the defensive sphere. The Zetherian ships, seeing the human attack, followed suit. 18 vessels concentrating their weapons on one section of the Varkesh formation. The firepower wasn't enough to break through alone, but it forced the targeted ships to divert power to shields, weakening other areas. War Leader Grask saw the attack developing. Fools. They think a desperate charge will save them. All ships concentrate fire on the attacking vessels. Destroy them. The Varkesh fleet responded, turning dozens of ships to face the human attack. Space lit up with weapons fire. The light cruiser Triumph took a direct hit from multiple battle cruisers. Her shields collapsed and the follow-up shots tore through her hull. Atmosphere vented into space as the ship broke apart, escape pods launching frantically. But the attack had achieved its purpose. For just a moment, the defensive sphere around the Varkesh flagship had a gap. Ships had turned to face the threat, leaving a narrow opening. Stevens, now. The Resolute, already damaged and limping, suddenly pushed its engines past their safety limits. The ship accelerated far faster than it should have been able to, burning through fuel reserves and overloading reactors. It shot through the gap in the Varkesh formation like a bullet. Varkesh ships tried to track it, but the destroyer was moving too fast, using every last bit of power. Weapons fire chased it, and several shots connected, tearing chunks out of the hull. But Stevens kept the ship on course, heading straight for the Wrath of Conquest. All hands, this is the captain, Stevens broadcast on all channels. Abandon ship. Repeat, abandon ship. Emergency evacuation procedures, you have 30 seconds. Escape pods burst from the Resolute as the crew evacuated. Stevens stayed at the helm, making constant course corrections to keep the dying ship on target. Around him, his bridge crew refused to leave. Captain, you should go, his tactical officer said. Not a chance. We've got one shot at this and I'm going to make sure we hit. Stevens watched the flagship growing larger on his view screen. The Varkesh ship was massive, easily 10 times the size of his destroyer. But size didn't matter when you were using a ship as a missile. Sir, warp core breach in 20 seconds. Good. Time it right. Stevens made one last adjustment. For Earth, you arrogant bastards. The Resolute slammed into the Wrath of Conquest's shields at a significant fraction of light speed. The shields held for almost a full second, a testament to Varkesh engineering. Then they collapsed, and the destroyer's hull punched through the flagship's armor. A microsecond later, the Resolute's warp core detonated. The explosion was visible. Across the entire battlefield, a miniature sun blooming in space. When the light faded, the Wrath of Conquest was still there, but it was crippled. A massive hole had been torn through 3 decks. Secondary explosions rippled along the hull as internal systems failed. The ship was venting atmosphere and debris. War Leader Grask had been thrown across his bridge by the impact. He pulled himself up, bleeding from multiple wounds, to see his tactical displays flickering and dying. Damage report. All primary systems offline. Life support failing on decks 7 through 14. Main weapons destroyed. Shield generators 2 through 5 offline. Sir, we need to evacuate. Grask roared in rage and pain. One small human ship had done this. One destroyer crewed by soft-skinned weaklings had crippled his flagship. It was impossible. It was insulting. It was effective. The other Varkesh ships, seeing their flagship burning, hesitated. The crews had been told this would be an easy fight. They had been told the humans were weak, that the Zetherians were no real threat. But they had just watched a human captain sacrifice his ship and crew to strike at their leader. What kind of species did that? On the Defiance, Ryan watched the explosion with mixed emotions. Gary Stevens had been a friend, a good captain, and a brave man. His sacrifice had achieved its purpose, but the cost was high. Sir, the Varkesh formation is breaking up, Sophie reported. Multiple ships moving to protect their flagship. Others are pulling back, they're confused. Press the attack. All ships. Target the vessels moving to assist the flagship. Zekthis, coordinate with us. We need to exploit this chaos. For the next 3 hours, the battle continued, but the momentum had shifted. The Varkesh were no longer confident. They were cautious, hesitant. They had seen what humans were willing to do, and it had shaken them. As the day stretched into night by arbitrary ships' time measurements, the Varkesh began to pull back. They had lost 8 ships destroyed outright, and another 20 were too damaged to continue fighting. The flagship was crippled and being towed out of the combat zone. The Allied forces had lost heavily. 1 human cruiser destroyed, 1 destroyer, lost in its ramming attack. Another destroyer barely functional. The Defiance was heavily damaged. The Zetherian fleet was down to 11 ships, but they held the field. War Leader Grask, evacuated to another battlecruiser, stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His fleet had been forced to retreat by an inferior enemy. It should have been impossible. But those humans had fought like nothing he had ever encountered. They had sacrificed ships, used their vessels as weapons, attacked with a ferocity that bordered on insanity. And the worst part was that the battle was being broadcast across the galactic networks. Every major power was watching. They had all seen the mighty Varkesh Dominion forced to retreat by a handful of humans and some ragtag Zetherian ships. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light travel. Battle footage, captured by automated sensor buoys and civilian ships watching from a safe distance, was being broadcast on every major network. The galactic public watched in fascination as the small human fleet and their Zetherian allies fought the Varkesh to a standstill. In council chambers, military academies, and government offices across known space, the same conversations were happening. The humans were supposed to have been destroyed in hours. Instead, they had been fighting for 3 weeks. The Varkesh had brought in reinforcements twice, and still the humans held on. At the Galactic Council headquarters, Ambassador Linda Hayes found herself in an unexpected position. Species that had ignored her before were now seeking meetings. Diplomats who had dismissed humanity as irrelevant were suddenly very interested in talking to Earth's representative. The Methodian Union's ambassador, Harmonic 7, requested a private meeting. Linda agreed, curious about what the crystalline being wanted. They met in one of the Council's neutral conference rooms, a space designed to accommodate any species comfortably. Ambassador Hayes, Harmonic 7 began, its crystalline body chiming softly as it moved. The Union has been watching the conflict in Kepler 7 with great interest. Interest, Linda repeated, keeping her tone neutral. Your people expressed sympathy but refused to help 3 weeks ago. A decision we are reconsidering. The crystalline being pulsed with light, which its translator rendered as a thoughtful pause. Your species fights with remarkable tenacity. The Varkesh were supposed to overwhelm your forces in hours. It has been 23 standard days. The Varkesh underestimated us. A lot of people did. Indeed, the Council is debating the situation. Some members feel the Varkesh aggression cannot be allowed to stand. Others worry about the cost of intervention. But the political calculation is changing. Linda leaned forward. Because the humans are still fighting. Yes, your species has demonstrated that the Varkesh can be resisted, that their military might is not absolute. If you, with your small fleet and limited resources, can hold them off this long, what could a proper coalition achieve? Linda saw the opening she had been waiting for. Ambassador, 3 weeks ago I stood before the Council and said that evil triumphs when good people do nothing. The Varkesh murdered 3,000 civilians and seized territory that wasn't theirs. If we let them get away with it, where does it stop? How many more systems will they take? How many more civilians will die? Harmonic 7's crystals dimmed thoughtfully. You make a compelling argument. The Methodian Union is prepared to commit forces to the defense of Kepler 7. We cannot allow aggressive expansion to become the new standard of galactic relations. What changed your mind? Your Captain Blake and his crew. They sacrificed their destroyer to strike at the Varkesh flagship. The footage of that attack has been viewed billions of times across the Union. Our people are asking why we stand by while a species barely capable of space travel shows more courage than we do. Linda felt a surge of hope. One major power joining the fight could change everything. When can we expect Methodian ships to arrive? Within 48 hours. And Ambassador Hayes, you should know that the Asharan Federation is also reconsidering its position. Your humans have shown them that conviction matters as much as military strength. After the meeting, Linda immediately sent a coded message to Captain Blake. The Defiance was still in the Kepler 7 system. Still fighting, but reinforcements were finally coming. At the Galactic Academy, Professor Kelvonis had suspended normal classes to follow the battle. His xenobiology students gathered in the lecture hall, watching live tactical feeds projected on holographic displays. The footage showed human fighters darting between Varkesh ships, the damaged but still functional Defiance coordinating with Zetherian vessels, constant running battles across the system. Jake Morrison stood at the front of the hall providing commentary. He was no longer just a student. The Academy had asked him to explain human tactical doctrine because, frankly, nobody else understood it. Watch this engagement, Jake said, pointing to a specific fighter squadron. The Varkesh cruiser has superior firepower and shields. By every logical measure, those fighters should retreat. But they don't. They press the attack, targeting specific systems rather than trying to destroy the ship outright. They're not trying to win that individual fight. They're degrading the enemy's capabilities over time. A student from the Kralik species raised a spined limb, but they are taking casualties. 3 fighters lost in that engagement alone. How is this sustainable? It's not, Jake admitted. Human tactics in this battle aren't designed for long-term sustainability. They're designed to make the Varkesh regret starting the fight. Every Varkesh ship that gets damaged has to pull back for repairs. Every sensor array we destroy makes their coordination worse. We're not fighting to win a decisive battle. We're fighting to make continuing the war more costly than the Varkesh are willing to pay. Professor Kelvonis clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. It is a strategy built on accepting losses in exchange for inflicting disproportionate psychological damage. Most species would consider such tactics wasteful. Most species aren't humans, Jake replied. We've been fighting this way for thousands of years. Earth's history is full of smaller forces using unconventional tactics to defeat larger enemies. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric combat, psychological operations. We learned a long time ago that you don't need to be stronger than your enemy. You just need to be more trouble than you're worth. Another student spoke up. But what about honor? What about fighting with dignity? Jake turned to face the student directly. With respect, honor doesn't mean much when you're dead. The Varkesh didn't show honor when they murdered 3,000 Zetherian civilians. They showed force. We're responding with the tools we have. If that means ramming ships, setting traps, and generally being the most annoying enemy possible, so be it. The lecture hall was quiet as the students absorbed this. For many of them, warfare was a concept tied to honor, to following established rules, to fighting in prescribed ways. The human approach was alien to them, unsettling, but it was also undeniably effective. Professor Kelvanis sent another message to Jake after the lecture ended. Cadet Morrison, I must confess that I am reassessing many of my theories about evolutionary advantages. Your species lacks physical weapons, but you have developed something perhaps more dangerous, a cultural adaptation to adversity. The ability to continue fighting when all logic says you should surrender. It is remarkable. Jake replied simply, Professor, spite isn't just a joke. It's in our DNA. Humans don't give up. We can't. It's wired into who we are. Back in the Kepler-7 system, Ryan Blake received the news about incoming reinforcements with cautious optimism. His ship was held together with emergency repairs and determination. He had lost 60% of his original crew, including many good friends. The Defiance was running on backup systems for half her critical functions, but they had held. Against odds that should have crushed them, they had held. Captain, message from Commander Zekthis, Sophie reported. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes from weeks of constant battle stations. He wants to thank you personally. The view screen flickered to life, showing the Zetherian commander. Zekthis looked different now than he had at the start of the conflict. More confident, more determined. Captain Blake, I have just received word that the Methodian Union and Asheron Federation are sending forces to our aid. After 3 weeks of fighting, we will finally have reinforcements. That's good news, Commander. Your people have fought bravely. We learned from watching yours. Before this conflict, I believed the Zetherians were a peaceful species, unsuited for prolonged warfare. Your humans showed us that military strength matters less than the will to fight. We adapted your tactics, your refusal to surrender. My people are calling this the human style of warfare. Ryan smiled tiredly. Just don't copy all our habits. We tend to take unnecessary risks. I have noticed. Captain, I must ask, how do your people maintain such determination? We have taken heavy losses. Our ships are damaged. By all logical assessments, we should have surrendered weeks ago, yet you never even suggested it. Because surrendering would mean the Varkesh win. It would mean those 3,000 civilians died for nothing. It would mean that might makes right in this galaxy. Humans have a saying, Commander. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We refuse to do nothing. Zekthis's antennae twitched in what Ryan had learned was their equivalent of a respectful nod. You have taught us much, Captain Blake. Not just tactics, but something more important. You have taught us that small species can stand against large ones. That justice matters more than power. That spite, as you call it, is indeed a weapon. The conversation ended, but Ryan sat quietly on his bridge, thinking about what Zekthis had said. Humanity had come to the stars hoping to find their place among the great civilizations of the galaxy. They had found a galaxy that measured worth by military strength, by natural advantages, by technological advancement, and humanity had shown them a different measure. Not how strong you... The Varkesh fleet returned to Kepler-7 with massive reinforcements. War leader Grask, his pride wounded and his reputation damaged, had called in every ship he could spare. He commanded over 300 warships now, determined to crush the human and Zetherian resistance once and for all. This was no longer just about controlling a resource-rich system. It was personal. The Defiance hung in space like a wounded animal, her hull scarred and patched, her systems running on emergency power. Ryan stood on his bridge, now staffed by less than half its original crew. The rest were dead or too injured to continue. He had requested replacement crew members, but Earth could only spare so many people this far from home. Sir, we're detecting massive jump signatures, Sophie reported, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. Multiple Varkesh fleets entering the system. Initial count is over 100 new ships joining their existing forces. Ryan nodded slowly, watching the tactical display fill with red enemy markers. The Varkesh were done playing around. This was going to be the final push, the attack meant to end the war. How long until the Methodian and Asheron fleets arrive? 12 hours, sir. Maybe less if they push their engines. 12 hours. Ryan had to keep his battered fleet alive for 12 more hours against an enemy that now outnumbered them by an even more ridiculous margin. The math was simple and brutal. They couldn't win this fight. They probably couldn't even survive it. Get me Commander Zekthis and all ship captains on a conference call. A few moments later, the view screen split into multiple sections, showing the faces of his remaining commanders and the Zetherian leader. Captain Helen Cruz commanded the light cruiser Valiant, barely holding together after 3 weeks of constant battle. Commander Kyle Patterson led the destroyer Swift Justice, one of only 2 human warships still functional. They all looked exhausted, pushed beyond human limits. "I won't lie to you," Ryan began. "The Varkesh are throwing everything they have at us. We're looking at 300 ships, probably more. Our reinforcements are 12 hours out. If we engage now, we won't survive. So we retreat?" Patterson asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "If we retreat, the Varkesh secure the system and set up defenses. When the Methodian and Asheron fleets arrive, they'll face a fortified position. More people will die, and the Varkesh will have time to call in even more reinforcements." Ryan paused, meeting each captain's eyes through their video feeds. "Or we buy those 12 hours. We make the Varkesh commit to a battle right now, before they can dig in. We keep them off balance until our allies arrive." Zekthis' antennae drooped. "Captain Blake, my fleet is down to 7 functional ships. Your fleet is barely in better condition. Against 300 Varkesh warships, we will be destroyed." "Probably," Ryan agreed. "But we'll take some of them with us, and we'll delay them just long enough for this to turn into a fair fight. The question is, are you willing to make that sacrifice?" The channel was quiet for a long moment. Then Helen Cruz spoke up, a fierce smile on her scarred face. "Captain, I've been fighting alongside you for 3 weeks. I've watched this crew do impossible things every single day. If this is our last stand, let's make it one they'll never forget." Patterson nodded. "Swift Justice is with you, sir. Let's show these overgrown lizards what happens when you back humans into a corner." One by one, the other captains agreed. They all knew they were probably signing their death warrants, but not one of them suggested surrender. The Zetherian ships, inspired by human example, also committed to the fight. "All right then," Ryan said. "We're going to use every dirty trick we have left. Sophie, transmit tactical package Omega-7 to all ships. We're going to make the Varkesh regret coming back." War leader Grask watched his armada advance with satisfaction. The humans had fought well, he admitted grudgingly, but their resistance ended here. He had brought overwhelming force. No amount of clever tactics could overcome such numerical superiority. "All ships advance in formation. Crush them," he commanded. The Varkesh fleet moved forward like an inexorable tide, shields glowing, weapons charging. They expected the humans to try another desperate trick, but what could they possibly do against such numbers? Then space around the human fleet suddenly filled with debris, chunks of destroyed ships, pieces of broken stations, even rocks from the system's asteroid belt. The humans had been collecting wreckage for weeks, and now they released it all at once, creating a cloud of high-velocity obstacles between the fleets. The Varkesh formation slowed, forced to carefully navigate through the debris field. Ships that moved too fast risked collision. One destroyer, advancing too aggressively, took a piece of destroyed hull plating at high relative velocity. The debris punched through its shields and tore a hole in its side. "Clever," Grask admitted. "But this only delays the inevitable. All ships proceed carefully through the debris field." What he didn't know was that the humans had packed some of that debris with emergency beacons, sensor jammers, and even a few functioning weapon systems stripped from destroyed ships. As the Varkesh fleet moved through the field, the debris came alive with electronic warfare, jamming signals, false targets, and occasional weapons fire. The orderly Varkesh advance turned into chaos as ships struggled to distinguish real threats from sensor ghosts. Commanders shouted conflicting orders. The tight formation broke apart as ships maneuvered to avoid collisions and deal with unexpected threats. And that's when the human and Zetherian forces struck. They burst out of hiding positions within the debris field, attacking from unexpected angles. The Defiance launched her remaining 16 fighters, each one loaded with every missile they could carry. They weren't coming back, and the pilots knew it. This was a one-way trip. Lieutenant Marcus Webb led the charge, his voice calm over the comm channel. "All fighters, this is Razor Lead. Remember, we're not trying to survive. We're trying to buy time. Make every shot count. For Earth." The fighters dove into the confused Varkesh formation like arrows finding their marks. They targeted command ships, vessels coordinating the enemy fleet. Marcus aimed his fighter at a heavy cruiser's bridge, firing missiles as he approached, then ramming his fighter into the ship's command section when his weapons ran dry. Other fighters followed similar tactics. They were suicide attacks, pure and simple, but each one took a Varkesh ship out of the fight, even if only temporarily. The Varkesh had superior numbers, but the humans were using their own lives as weapons. Ryan watched the tactical display, his heart heavy as fighter after fighter disappeared from the screen. Those were his people dying to buy minutes, but those minutes mattered. Each delay gave the Methodian and Asheron fleets more time to arrive. "Captain, multiple shield failures on the Defiance," Sophie reported. "We're taking heavy fire. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 5. Casualties mounting. Keep us in the fight. Divert all remaining power to weapons." The Defiance shuddered under repeated impacts. Warning sirens blared. The lights flickered as power systems struggled to keep up. But Ryan kept his ship in the battle, trading fire with Varkesh vessels at point-blank range. The destroyer Swift Justice took a direct hit from 3 battle cruisers simultaneously. Her shields collapsed, her reactor went critical, and she exploded in a brief flash of light. Commander Patterson and his entire crew were gone in an instant. Helen Cruz's Valiant was badly damaged, venting atmosphere, but still fighting. "Captain Blake, I've lost main engines. We're dead in space, going to make ourselves useful one last time." Ryan knew what she meant. "Godspeed, Captain Cruz." The Valiant used her maneuvering thrusters to position herself between the Defiance and an incoming Varkesh battlecruiser. The enemy ship's weapons tore the light cruiser apart, but the sacrifice bought Ryan precious seconds to maneuver away. The battle was brutal, desperate, and hopeless. The human and Zetharian forces were being destroyed piece by piece. But they fought on, never surrendering, never giving up, buying every second they could with their lives. War leader Grask watched the battle with growing frustration. His fleet was winning, yes, but the casualties were higher than they should be. These humans were fighting like cornered animals, and they were making his victory expensive. Very expensive. Then his tactical officer shouted, "War leader, multiple jump signatures detected, large fleet incoming." The view screen shifted to show new arrivals. The Methodian Union fleet, over 100 ships of crystalline design, beautiful and deadly. Behind them, the Asheron Federation added 80 heavy warships to the field. The odds had just shifted dramatically. "Varkesh forces, this is Fleet Commander Harmonic 7 of the Methodian Union. We are here to enforce Galactic Council resolution condemning your aggression. Stand down immediately or face the consequences." Grask's eyes widened. The Coalition fleet now matched his numbers, maybe even exceeded them. And unlike his ships, which had been fighting for hours and were scattered and disorganized, the new arrivals were fresh and in perfect formation. "Captain Blake," Harmonic 7's voice came over the human channel. "We received your message about engaging the enemy. That was remarkably risky. We are here now. Let us take over while you withdraw for repairs." Ryan, standing on a bridge that was half destroyed, crew dead or dying around him, felt relief wash over him. Acknowledged Harmonics. "Thanks." Ryan Blake woke up in a medical bay, though he didn't remember being brought there. His body ached everywhere, and when he tried to sit up, pain shot through his left side. A medical technician, Zytharian, based on the clicking sounds, gently pushed him back down. "Captain Blake, you must rest. You have 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and severe burns on your left arm. You are fortunate to be alive." The memories came flooding back. The final battle. The desperate defense. The arrival of the Coalition fleet. Ryan had stayed on the Defiance's bridge until the very end, even when the ship was falling apart around him. An explosion had thrown him across the bridge, and everything after that was blank. "My crew?" The technician's antennae drooped. "I will have Commander Zekthis inform you of casualty reports. For now, you need medical treatment." An hour later, Zekthis visited Ryan's bedside. The Zetharian commander looked different now, more confident, standing taller. "Captain Blake, it is good to see you awake. You gave us quite a scare. The Defiance? She survived, though barely. Your ship is currently being towed to the Methodian repair facilities. The structural damage is extensive, but she can be rebuilt." Zekthis paused. "Your crew was not so fortunate. Of the original 240 personnel, 67 survived. Most of the losses occurred in the final battle." Ryan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those numbers. 173 people dead, 173 families that would receive notification. 173 empty seats at dinner tables back on Earth. Captain Cruz and Commander Patterson? Captain Cruz survived. She was evacuated from the Valiant before its destruction. Commander Patterson did not make it. The Swift Justice was lost with all hands. Ryan had known Kyle Patterson for 8 years. They had served together, fought together, shared drinks and stories. Now his friend was gone, vaporized in an instant when his ship exploded. The war? Ryan asked, needing to focus on something other than the losses. Over. The Varkesh withdrew from Kepler-7 after the Coalition fleet arrived. War leader Grask's armada took severe casualties, and the Varkesh government has sued for peace. The Galactic Council is negotiating terms now, but the outcome is certain. The Varkesh will return all seized territories and pay reparations to the Zetherian Collective. We won? You won, Captain Blake. Your species, with minimal resources and overwhelming odds against you, held the line long enough for others to act. The Zetherians assisted, but make no mistake, this victory belongs to humanity. You showed us that courage and determination matter more than raw military power. Over the next few weeks, as Ryan recovered from his injuries, the scope of what had happened became clear. The Battle of Kepler-7 had changed galactic politics fundamentally. Species that had operated on the assumption that might made right were now questioning that philosophy. At the Galactic Academy, Professor Kelvonis completely revised his xenobiology curriculum. His course on evolutionary advantages now included an entire section on psychological warfare and cultural adaptations to adversity. He called it the human factor. Jake Morrison stood once again before a lecture hall full of students, but the atmosphere was completely different now. These students weren't mocking him or dismissing his species. They were leaning forward, eager to understand how humanity had achieved the impossible. The concept of spite, Jake explained, pacing at the front of the hall, is often misunderstood. People think it means being petty or vindictive, but in the context of human warfare, spite means something else. It means refusing to accept defeat even when defeat seems certain. It means making your enemy pay for every inch of ground, every small victory, until the cost becomes unbearable. A Methodian student, its crystalline body reflecting light across the hall, raised a limb to ask a question. But surely this approach is inefficient. You take heavy casualties in pursuit of victories that might not materialize. Sometimes, Jake agreed. Human history is full of battles we lost while fighting this way. But it's also full of battles we should have lost but won through sheer refusal to quit. And even when we lose, we make sure our enemies remember us. The Varkesh might have eventually won at Kepler-7 if the Coalition hadn't arrived, but they would have paid a terrible price. Sometimes that's enough. Professor Kelvonis clicked his mandibles thoughtfully from his position at the side of the hall. I have spent considerable time studying the battle records. What strikes me most is not the tactics themselves, which were often desperate and improvised, but the psychological impact. The Varkesh expected a conventional engagement. They expected the humans to break when casualties reached a certain threshold. When that didn't happen, it created doubt and fear in their ranks. Exactly, Jake said. The Varkesh measured strength in ship numbers and weapon yield. Humans measure strength differently. We measure it in willingness to sacrifice, in ability to adapt, in refusal to accept limitations. Captain Blake and his crew knew they probably wouldn't survive. They fought anyway because the alternative was letting evil win unchallenged. An Asharan student, massive and bear-like, spoke in a rumbling voice. Your Captain Blake has become famous across the Federation. We are calling him the Unyielding. It is a title of great respect among my people. Jake felt pride at that. Ryan Blake deserved recognition, though Jake suspected the captain would be embarrassed by all the attention. Captain Blake did what any human would do in that situation. He saw something wrong and decided to stand against it, regardless of the cost. That's not unique to him. That's human nature. After the lecture, Commander Zekthus approached Jake. The Zetherian leader was visiting the academy to give a series of guest lectures about the war. Cadet Morrison, I wanted to thank you personally. If you had not spoken up in Professor Kelvonis's class all those months ago, I might not have understood what made your species special. When Captain Blake explained his tactics, I remembered your words about spite being a weapon. It helped me understand what we needed to do. You adapted quickly, Commander. Your people fought just as bravely as ours. We learned from the best teachers. The Zetherian military is now training all officers in what we call human-style tactics. We have come to understand that sometimes the most effective strategy is simply refusing to lose. The conversation was interrupted by Professor Kelvonis, who had a message for Jake. Cadet Morrison, you have been requested by the Galactic Council. Ambassador Hayes wants you to join the Earth delegation permanently. Your insights.